Hello, and welcome to Beyond Biotech, the weekly podcast from Labiotech. I'm Dylan Kassane, and this is episode 169 for the podcast. In today's episode, we welcome Clarke Futch, Chairman and CEO of Healthcare Royalty Partners, or HCRx. HCRx are pioneers in royalty-based financing with a 30-year track record in biopharma investing. Clarke has led more than 60 royalty acquisitions, totaling nearly $4 billion, and raised over $8 billion across various vehicles, executing more than 165 transactions that have fueled breakthroughs in life sciences. In this interview, we examine the evolution of alternative funding models, the transformative impact of alternative funding models on biotech innovation, partnerships, and M&A, and take a macro view on the financial health of the industry amid economic shifts. There are insights for founders, investors, and anyone passionate about advancing medicine. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Clarke Futch, coming up right after this message from our friends at Inside Biotech.
Are you curious about the people and breakthroughs shaping the future of biotechnology? Then you've got to check out Inside Biotech, hosted by me, Gabriella Rubert. Inside Biotech features monthly conversations with the scientists, entrepreneurs, and investors driving innovation in one of the fastest growing biotech hubs, Los Angeles. Recent episodes featured topics like drug repurposing for treatment of certain cancers, science-backed consumer wellness brands, and navigating career transitions outside of academic research. From cutting-edge science to real career stories, it's where science storytelling, big business, and professional development all intersect. Search Inside Biotech wherever you get your podcasts and hit follow today.
Clarke, welcome to Beyond Biotech.
Thanks, Dylan. Happy to be here.
Clarke, can you tell me a little bit about your early career? What actually drew you into healthcare and biopharma? How did you get started?
So I got started in healthcare. I was an investment banker, and I initially went to work at Raymond James. And we had at the time, they had a rotational program where every 6 months you would rotate into different industry groups. So I spent time in the tech group and time in the leisure and entertainment, we called it. And then I rotated into the healthcare group and really enjoyed it. And I ended up staying there permanently. So a little bit of serendipity, I suppose, but it's been almost 30 years now in the healthcare space for me.
Besides the different domains, healthcare and lifestyle and entertainment, is there a different way of approaching investments in each of those domains?
Yeah, I mean, in those different areas, at the time I was an investment banker, so advising companies on doing IPOs and M&A and things like that. And certainly all different areas have different approaches, I think, both from an investment standpoint and a financing standpoint. And one of the things about what we do, healthcare and life sciences specifically, is you have business models in life sciences that are very long term, right? It takes 8 to 10 years to get a product through clinical trials, and then you have another typically 10 to 12 years of commercial life. So you have these long-term business models with regulatory protection, patent protection, et cetera, and yet you need to finance relatively short term, every 12 to 24 months as you hit certain milestones, raise additional capital to do the next clinical trial or to launch the product, et cetera. So it's a really interesting dynamic. And as I like to say for these life science companies, they have a voracious appetite for capital. And so it makes it fun and interesting to be able to see if you can creatively solve those capital needs to move these medicines along their pathway.
You worked at Thomas Weisel, also at Paul Capital Partners, and there you're involved in the royalty activities. Was that the first time you were really working with royalties?
It was. This is going back 25 years, Dylan, so quite a while. At the time, I had all dark hair. Now I have all silver hair. So it's been a while. And I was at Thomas Weisel Partners out in San Francisco in the 1999, 2000 timeframe. And in life sciences, then there was this what we call genomics wave, right, where they just mapped the human genome, and that really was a significant contributor to an acceleration in innovation that's happened over the last 20, 25 years. And it was very early on in royalty monetization. So just to give you some numbers, in 2001, the first year I was in the royalty business, the entire market, if you added up all transactions put together, was less than $150 million. Today, and so the market's grown 50, 60 times in over the last couple decades. And our average deal size today for a single asset is $150 million. So I became aware of this royalty financing, and I had an opportunity. I was contacted by a headhunter, had an opportunity to go join this firm, Paul Capital, who was one of the innovators, early innovators in royalty monetization. And I guess like all investment bankers, I thought I wanted to be an investor, a principal investor. And so, again, a little bit of luck, being in the right place at the right time. I joined Paul Capital, and the royalty financing market, I wouldn't say it took off, but it started to grow rapidly. And you compound high growth over 2 decades, and it adds up. And what we've seen is over that time frame, if you went back, it was almost a missionary sale. There were very few of these royalty monetizations done. There weren't that many players. There wasn't that much dedicated capital. But again, go back to my comment about life science companies and a voracious appetite for capital to fund innovation. And we've seen innovation really accelerate over the last couple decades, probably the last decade in particular. And so the capital needs continue to increase. Companies are looking for multiple ways to raise capital, whether that's doing an equity offering, public equity offering, whether it's raising venture debt, whether it's doing a partnership and out-licensing their product to Europe or Japan, if it's a U.S. company, or royalty monetization. And so royalty monetization has become much more commonplace today than it has been, and it's just another tool in the toolbox for these emerging biopharma companies to raise capital.
That takes us pretty cleanly on to the next thing I wanted to talk about, which is your current role and your work at Healthcare Royalty, or HCRx. For people who are a little bit unfamiliar with the company, what exactly do you do?
Yeah, so we provide capital to emerging biopharma companies primarily by purchasing royalties they're receiving from other companies. So I'll give you an example. In June of this year, we closed a deal with a company in San Francisco called BridgeBio. BridgeBio is one of the innovators in the biotech world. And they recently got approved and launched a new drug in the cardiovascular area. Very innovative. Not a lot of innovation in cardiovascular over the last decade or so. So really a new, innovative, solving a significant unmet medical need for patients. And they're marketing that product themselves in the U.S., but they out-licensed or sold the patent rights in Europe to Bayer. Bayer's a big company, European-based. Bayer has a long and large franchise in cardiovascular, so it's a good marketing partner for this particular product. Product gets approved also in Europe recently. Bayer launches the product, and BridgeBio, again, voracious appetite for capital, needs more money to turbocharge its launch of the product here in the U.S., which it's marketing itself. So it's looking to raise capital. They did a big convert, I think earlier this year, but need more capital to accelerate the commercial growth and launch. So we paid BridgeBio $300 million at closing, and now we receive directly from Bayer a portion of that royalty that BridgeBio had been receiving on European sales. So that's a very typical example, classic example of how we provide capital to these emerging and high growth biopharma companies.
Do these biopharma companies already have the royalties signed? They already have the licensing agreement signed, or do you come in even earlier?
They typically do have the license agreement put in place, which many times put in place maybe years ago. And again, it's part of a financing tool. So in the case of BridgeBio, a couple of years ago, very common, they were going to focus on the US market. And they therefore wanted to out-license the product in non-US markets and here for Bayer in the European market. And that came with a large upfront amount of capital when they did this out-license, which they could deploy that capital into the US, and also with a significant royalty stream. And then subsequently, again, a couple months ago, they monetized a portion of the royalty stream, again, to fuel their US growth.
Now, BridgeBio is a recent example, but on my research, you've funded more than 100 biopharma firms now. And is it north of $7 billion now you've got in?
Yeah, so we've raised $7 billion of equity capital in a series of funds. And we've now evolved to having a permanent capital vehicle. We've done, I think it's 110 of these royalty related type financings over the last couple decades. So large number of transactions, similar in a lot of ways, but they're all a little bit bespoke in their own particular way. And the first half of this year, Dylan, we participated in $1 billion of royalty transaction volume. So that is a record pace for us. And I think we'll close a few more deals this year. It'll probably be a record year for us. But we also did $1 billion of transaction volume in 2020 when it was a bull market for biotech. So the one thing about royalty monetization, I think that's a little different is we like to describe it an all-weather strategy. Good markets, bad markets, okay markets. Companies are looking for capital. And one of the things that's changed and evolved over the course of my career is sort of size and scale, right? This renaissance in innovation that's happened over the last decade has driven the need to raise more capital for these emerging biopharma companies and to raise larger amounts of capital. If you look back 6-7 years ago, average deal size for us was 50 million. Today it's 150 million. So their needs have gone up, and so what we've tried to do is fill those needs as best we can.
You've got offices today in New York, San Francisco, Boston, London. I mean, this is a world of Zoom. Do you really need offices in those locations? Is a global footprint necessary? Does it add some value in some way?
Yeah, I love this question, by the way. It is a world of Zoom, right? Witness what we're doing now, which is great, but mission critical to be in these biopharma hotspots from our standpoint. Being early and often in terms of developing relationships with the emerging biopharmas, understanding what their financing needs are, getting to know the management team, that takes time. It's a long sales cycle in our business. Once someone decides they want to do something, and of course they want that to happen immediately, but leading up to that point literally takes years. And so we made a strategic decision 10 years ago, actually, to put people where the clusters are, right? There's obviously companies all over the globe, but the clusters are certainly in the San Francisco Bay Area. And of course, it's a short plane ride down to San Diego, another sort of mini cluster of companies. Certainly Boston and Cambridge, Massachusetts. You swing a cat in Cambridge and you'll hit half a dozen or more biotech companies. So there's a lot going on there, part driven by what's going on at MIT and Harvard and Dana-Farber and the academic and research institutions driving that. And I would say about Boston in particular, we sent someone up there, it's probably 8 years ago now, where there was a lot of early stage assets, a lot of early stage products that we thought some subset of those will be successful, get to late stage, get to commercial. And boy, has that played out. That has really played out quite well. And one of my partners up there in Boston, it's become a huge market for us. And London, I would say we've been there for probably 6 years. And it's taken some time, but that market, we're actually quite bullish on what's going on in Europe. And I use London because you have the so-called Golden Triangle, Oxford, Cambridge, London, a lot of, as you probably know, a lot of technology, a lot of academic institutions and research institutions coming out of that area. But also, it's a short hop to, the Nordics are actually quite, productive. Stockholm, Copenhagen, Switzerland, of course, Basel, Zurich, Geneva, parts of Germany, Paris. We did a deal in Paris in the first quarter, which is the first deal we've done in France ever. So lots going on in Europe. And we're actually quite bullish on Europe, which may sound a little counterintuitive because if you talk to the venture community, there's been a dearth of venture capital in Europe, and there's almost been a consolidation in the U.S. And we're finding really interesting opportunities in Europe. And so of that $1 billion that we did in the first half of this year, half of that, 500 million, related to Europe. This Bridge Bio deal that I mentioned, Bridge is in the U.S., but the product, the royalties are European royalties from Bayer. And we also did about a $200 million deal with a Paris-based biotech company in France called Genfit. And we bought a royalty that Genfit is receiving from Ipsen, another French company, global rights of the product. It's a rare liver disease product sold in the US and Europe globally by Ipsen. So 50% of what we did in the first half in Europe, historically, it's been about 20%. So we've been investing in the last, we have a great guy in London that's been with us about 18 months now. And there's a lot going on. I'm going to go spend first 2 weeks of October with him, traveling all around to all the cities I just mentioned. So we're pretty bullish on Europe. We're investing there, from a corporate standpoint and people and processes. So we're excited about Europe. And you can't forget New York. And New York, for us, is a catch-all. It's kind of the eastern seaboard, sort of New York. A lot going on in New Jersey, outside Philadelphia, outside D.C. and Rockville and Gaithersburg, Maryland. Kind of another cluster, Research Triangle Park in North Carolina, down to Florida, sort of Palm Beach down to Miami. So there's a lot. That's a big region for us geographically. There's a lot going on, and so that's how we approach it. And being in those markets locally matters. I don't know if it matters a lot, but it matters a little bit. And in our business, a little bit matters a lot to us.
Clarke, you talked about some of the differences there in perspective between a royalty firm like your own and a venture capital firm. What about from the perspective of the biopharma firm or the biotech? Because your funding, it's non-dilutive, it's not an equity investment. Why might that be attractive to a biopharma firm?
Yeah, most of the companies we deal with are publicly traded. So the public markets, beyond traditional venture capital, which is typically investing in very early stage, preclinical, maybe very early clinical stage products. Most of them get to the public markets. It's been a little more challenging here recently, as you know, the public markets and the IPO market. So most of what we're funding are public companies who are looking at what are alternatives to raise capital. And I think what's changed for us and for me, maybe in the last 5 years in particular, and a trend that we see accelerating, is not viewing us as one or the other. Either we raise equity or we do a royalty deal, but really to view it as complementary. Sometimes they'll do the transaction at the same time, but lots of times they'll do an equity deal when the phase 3 data reads out and there's a nice pop in the stock price, and then a year later when they need to file and raise some capital to get ready for launch, we're a great alternative there. So again, go back to the fundamental that I talked about early on, and the need for capital, the growth and size and scale of capital that these emerging biopharma companies, they're really looking for any alternative. What are the tools in the financing toolbox? If I'm on the board, if I'm the CEO, CFO of one of these companies, where can I access capital to fund my business plan? So we really work, I think, in a very complementary fashion with equity, whether that's straight equity or like a convert, which is an equity derivative type of instrument. And of course, we know all the venture firms. We have a lot of respect for them. And if there's a good venture firm, that's validation, makes us interested and willing to do some work. But I really view us as a complementary financing to traditional equity capital raises.
These sort of alternative funding models, just moving away from a straight IPO, they're starting to gain a little bit of traction when it comes to biotechs. Can you talk a little bit about what you've seen, particularly, I guess, in the past 5 years post-COVID? Why are people turning to alternatives like royalty financing?
I think at the macro level, it's because there's been great science, there's been great innovation, and think about things like in the oncology space, where I was just thinking about this morning, preparing for this, multiple myeloma. I remember 20 years ago, multiple myeloma, it was almost a death sentence if you were diagnosed. Today, it's treatable. The number of new medications there is phenomenal, and it's almost become chronic. Now, that's not true of everything in oncology, but we're seeing areas, whether it's in rheumatoid arthritis, psoriasis, oncology, that tremendous innovation, hemophilia, for example. We just invested in a gene therapy for hemophilia. So you've had tremendous innovation. That's a macro trend. You need to fund that innovation, right? And I think people are looking, people meaning biotech companies, emerging biopharma companies, natural instinct is to raise equity because that's kind of how they always raise capital. That's how the board always raises capital. But particularly in a market where it's more challenging to raise equity, or if there's a company-specific issue, right? They may be a company-specific issue. Maybe their lead program, the trial failed and they need to now fund the next program in line. And so they're starting to think about alternatives. And then what's happened over the last 5 years is they realize, again, all-weather strategy, good market, bad market. Take Albireo. This is a company that was in Boston. They out-licensed a product in Japan. Several years ago, we did 2 deals with them into 2017, early 2018, then again in 2020. It was kind of a 2-stage deal. They ultimately got sold to Ipsen, and they basically used the royalty financing to fund, of a product that was selling in Japan, to fund their lead program. That lead program was ultimately successful. Ultimately, they got sold to Ipsen. Shareholders did very well. So people are starting to realize I can use this royalty financing strategy, maybe not when I don't have any other choices, but again, as part of my armamentarium of financing solutions. I can partner out the product. I can do a royalty financing. I can do an equity financing. I can do a convert. Maybe I can do some venture debt. So just a lot more options out there for these companies, which is great for innovation. And it's been good for us too.
Is there a sense that VC is pulling back a little bit since COVID, and that biotechs are looking for these alternatives, not just because they might be attractive, but because they just can't find any venture money?
There's some of that going on. Yeah, for sure. There's been a retrenchment, I think, on venture capital in life sciences. So, life sciences is tough. It's hard to predict in the future if a drug's going to work, and the capital requirements are high. So the number of equity rounds that you have to raise as you go from Series A to Series B to C to D, it's a lot of capital required. And so there has been a bit of a retrenchment. But I think the overwhelming factor has been that there's just more capital need. There's been innovation. These products are getting to market. Sometimes the companies decide to launch themselves. So we did a deal with a company called Rhythm Pharmaceuticals, another Boston-based company. I think that was in 2019 or 2020. We did that deal, and they had a great product. It had just been about to be approved for an expanded indication. It's an orphan product for genetic obesity, effectively. And I remember sitting down with the CEO to do due diligence a couple months before the deal closed, and they had less than a $200 million market cap. And I was like, why do you have a $200 million market cap? That doesn't make any sense. You have a product that's about to be approved in this new expanded indication. We thought it was really attractive. And he said, well, that's why we're talking to you, right? We don't want to raise equity at this valuation. And we did the deal. Product has done very well, beat expectations. I think it's a multi-billion-dollar market cap today, $4, $5, $6 billion company. So not everyone, of course, goes that way, but that was a case where we did what we call a revenue interest financing or synthetic royalty, which is, take my example for Bridge, where Bridge is the innovator. Bridge out-licenses to Bayer. Bridge receives a royalty from Bayer. We buy the royalty from Bridge, we get paid by Bayer. That's a classic royalty monetization. That's 2/3 of what we do. But what we also recognize, and a while ago we recognized that all a royalty is just a percentage of sales. So if you go to a company like Rhythm Pharmaceuticals, which is both the innovator, they innovated the technology themselves, the drug, but they're also going to market it themselves, because in the case of Rhythm, it's a rare disease. It's a finite number of patients, a small number of patients, unlike Bayer in the cardiovascular, which is a larger area. So Rhythm is going to market it themselves. And so we went to Rhythm and said, how about we buy a percentage of revenue of the product? I think it was like 10% of sales, something like that, order of magnitude. And you take that capital and deploy it into your commercial launch. And so that's what we did. In that case, as an alternative to raising equity. They've subsequently done a couple of equity raisings at higher prices. So it's been good for the shareholders. And it's been good for us. So there's an alternative. And what's evolved, I think, in the last several years is the recognition that we can take this royalty model, and there are other flavors that we can use. So we can buy a royalty, we can create a synthetic royalty. Sometimes we'll do it in a bond structure where we'll put the royalty into an SPV and issue a note or a bond off of that. And there are various reasons why the companies want to do that. So we've been able to evolve our business model, expand our business model. And that's really a desire and a recognition that there's more capital needs. And if we can be a little more creative around trying to solve the company's capital needs, there's an opportunity to participate in a broader array of products. I mean, we have in our portfolio today, I think, 55 products. So it's very large, very diversified, many different therapeutic categories, many different stages of products, launching products, mature products, products in between. We did an animal health product recently for feline diabetes, or as I call it, the fat cat deal. So it's fun. It's fun because every day something's changing. No 2 days are the same. It's intellectually challenging for sure. But helping these companies solve their capital needs, it's exciting.
I'm also interested in how these models of investment that you've got influence the way that biotechs and top pharma are actually building partnerships. Do they make collaborations between the two more attractive? Do they change the way that the biotech might negotiate with the top pharma company, or is it something completely separate?
Well, I would say if you went back 10 or 20 years, the emerging biopharmas didn't give a lot of thought to what happens down the road. And when they construct these partnerships, they didn't really plan for, maybe I want to monetize the royalty at some point in the future. And so what's evolved, and it's been an education process, is planning for the future and kind of allowing for, if you will, in the contract that you could do a royalty monetization. So that's one element that's changed. The other element is certainly from a negotiating standpoint, the way the emerging biopharma companies look at it is, if I can do a royalty monetization and not have to sell equity, and if I can put a significant amount of cash on my balance sheet, I'm going to be in a better position to negotiate with big pharma versus me being cash constrained and being in a weaker negotiating position. So I think doing a royalty monetization as an interim step, maybe to move the product further along in its clinical development, maybe to get the product approved and launched, is a way to realize potentially more shareholder value. Albireo, again, good example of that. They ultimately got sold, and there's lots of examples of that. And so, but we do recognize that almost all these companies get bought, right? They almost all do. The big fish eat the little fish. And so almost always there's a way to buy out the royalty structure. So there's planning up front to preserve the corporate flexibility that downstream we probably get sold. Maybe the big pharma wants to buy out the royalty structure and keep that gross margin for the big pharma. So we recognize that and we build that into the deals almost always.
Are there any downsides in terms of maybe risks to innovation? I'm thinking here about an over-reliance on these future revenues that are going to be coming in, or some sort of misalignment with long-term R&D. What's the potential downside of a royalty deal?
I think the potential downside if you're the emerging biopharma company, the potential downside is selling too cheaply. If you sell today and the product dramatically underperforms, it's probably a good deal for the emerging biopharma because they probably got overpaid. That happens sometimes, but not that often. But they're concerned about a windfall, right? That we buy this royalty and it becomes a humongous product and they sold too cheaply. So almost always, Dylan, there's some kind of cap in the deal, or soft cap, hard cap, where if the product does super well, like beyond everyone's expectations, some or most or sometimes all of the upside still stays with the emerging biopharma company. So there's a lot of structure to these deals that they can be tailored individually to the particular circumstances. But more often than not, we're happy to share, again, some or most of that upside with the biotech company if things go spectacularly well.
By the time an innovator gets to a royalty deal, that the product's it's going to be commercialized, or it's even already on the market, and they're looking for extra capital. In some ways, that de-risks your investment because you're not betting on a phase 1 trial. You're not betting on something that's just coming out of a lab. Does that mean you're also spending a lot more than someone who's coming in early?
if you mean by spending, I think on deal sizes, the answer is yes. So our deal sizes tend to be larger than an early stage round of venture financing, where that's changing a little bit too, right? Some of these venture rounds are getting to be. I saw one announced yesterday. It was $100 million, but more often than not, it's maybe a $50 million round of financing, whereas ours are, 100, 200, 300 million. So you're right, because there is less risk. The product is further along in its life. It's typically at approval. Maybe it's launching. Maybe it's been on the market a few years. And so that allows us to do two things. One, we can write larger checks, which we're doing. And the second thing is, we're not looking for equity-like returns because it's not equity-like risk. Now, it's not like it's these companies. It's not Pfizer typically. So it's they're still emerging biopharma companies. So it's something in between, kind of mezzanine, and we price our deals accordingly from a risk return standpoint. So there is balance there. It's still a reasonably efficient market. And so yes, I think it does have an impact.
I want to pull you back a little bit and talk maybe a little bit more about the sector as a whole. If you can look at it as someone who's been there investing and managing for more than 30 years, how do you assess the health of the funding ecosystem right now? Is there enough money? Are we waiting for something? Is it about to turn? I've seen a couple of IPOs in the last couple of months, not many more than a couple, but are there changes coming to this sector?
Their changes are always coming to the sector. That's what makes it interesting. So certainly the equity markets have been a bit bifurcated into the haves and have-nots, and you read a lot about companies that have lots of cash on their balance sheet that's not really being recognized by the market, and so how that shakes out, I think, is to be determined. There's capital available. The way I think about it, Dylan, is there's capital available for good products. And so to the extent you have an innovative product solving an unmet medical need or an underserved medical need, have strong patents, good marketing partner, there's definitely capital available. But it's not, if you went back 10 years ago, maybe longer, anything that had the name immuno-oncology got funded, right? And probably overfunded. And you see this in capital markets, forever, actually, where capital runs in, it's probably overfunded, and then there's a rationalization that happens. So a little bit of that is going on, but good products, good companies can still be funded. And from our standpoint, royalty monetizations and creation of synthetic royalties is just another way to fill that funding gap. So I don't think we're opportunity constrained. It's just hard to find good products, but they're out there. It's not. We had a period, in COVID where there was a tremendous amount of funding for biotech. That's pulled back for sure in the last several years. But again, we've continued to deploy, having a record pace so far this year. So I think the long-term macro trends are still quite positive, right? Aging demographics, increased innovation, need for capital, increasing capital needs. And the royalty market, of all the capital needs raised for these emerging biopharma companies, royalty financing represents less than 5%. So we're still way underpenetrated. It's not the first inning of, use an American baseball analogy. It's not the first inning, but it's maybe the second or third inning, right? We're still early on, and that's what gets us excited. And in the U.S., there's certainly a lot of noise around the FDA and CDC and all of that, but we're still seeing products get approved. We're still seeing companies, marching along in the drug development, drug regulatory approval pathway. So we tend to think about things on a very long-term basis. There's a little bit of noise now. I think, I talked to someone recently who's more of a generalist, and their view was we're just not doing anything in life sciences right now because, noise. Our view is run at that, right? Run at that. We've got 35 people on our team. Their DNA is all about biopharma and life sciences. And fortunately, our folks have been around a long time, decades of experience. So we're not perfect by any stretch, but we've seen these cycles before. We've seen multiple cycles. And when I look backwards and when some of these challenging or disruptive periods happen, my regret is not investing too much during those periods. My regret is investing too little. So again, you got to stay disciplined, have a rigorous process, but we're running at this opportunity, not away from it.
Are there areas in biotech right now, whether it's therapeutic areas or geographies, where the funding is lagging, or there are real opportunities for funding to fly in?
Yeah, one I mentioned earlier, I think Europe for us is an area where we see an opportunity. We've planted the proverbial seeds over the last several years, and we think there's an increased opportunity in Europe, and we have an increased focus and dedicating increased resources. We've also done a number of Japan-only deals. I mentioned this Albireo deal. That was for a product sold in Japan only. So we have someone that works with us in Tokyo. We continue to look at that market. It's not the size of the U.S., but Japan's a very large pharmaceutical market, so we're looking there. And so, the U.S. continues. The U.S. is still by far the largest pharmaceutical market in the world, and so we continue to do most of our investing in the U.S. So that's geographically. I think there are areas that are interesting. We've done some investing in gene therapy. That was a hot sector for a while. Now everybody hates it, so makes us think, well, maybe we should look at it, take a little bit of a contrarian view. Not all gene therapies are the same. We bought a royalty in a gene therapy called Zolgensma, which is marketed by Novartis. That's done quite well. I mentioned we just did this relatively new gene therapy in hemophilia, and it's early. It's very early, but our investments are 10-year investments. We're not worried about what happens the next quarter. We're worried about, what's going to happen 5-10 years from now. So you don't always get it right. And it's part of why having a portfolio rather of 50 plus products is important, because some are going to do well, some are going to do not so well. Most are going to be in line with our expectations. At least that's been the history. So we're pretty agnostic on therapeutic categories. We're, I think, currently investing in 11 or 12. Historically, we've probably been in up to 20 therapeutic categories. So we like to have a kind of a replica of the pharma market, being in lots of different therapeutic categories. The area where we've continued to invest over a long period of time, going back 20 plus years, is in rare diseases or orphan diseases. So these are diseases that affect a small number of patients. It's a regulatory designation of less than 200,000 patients in the US, 250,000 in Europe. So small number relative to like statins, right? Which tens of millions of people take statins. And the reason that in about 50% of our portfolio, a little more than 50% today, are in these orphan or rare diseases is because you get special regulatory protection. So this is what's called orphan drug designation. So that in addition to the patents, you have this special regulatory designation, which is helpful. But really, it's about addressing unmet medical needs. This Zolgensma product, gene therapy, you get, basically one shot. And it's for young kids who have an incredibly debilitating disease. And you're addressing an unmet clinical need where either they have a very, very poor quality of life as those children age, or sometimes they don't survive. So the rare diseases are unmet clinical need, and again, going back to mapping of the human genome, acceleration of computing power, these large language models, which today we call AI, all of that has led to an ability to identify and develop drugs that can address some of these rare indications, and we think those are really interesting because of the unmet clinical need and an attractive investment opportunity as well.
Clarke, if we can look forward a little bit now, in these next 6 to 12 months, I mentioned there have been just a couple of IPOs in the last quarter, but should we expect investors to become happier about investing in IPOs? Are we going to see more than that? What's the feeling out there? What's the sentiment on the street?
I don't believe the floodgates are going to open just yet. I don't. The macro environment is one of incrementalism. The tariff concern seems to have been abated a bit. The interest rate environment seems, inflation has come down, hasn't gone away, but it's come down. Looks like rates are coming down a bit. So the floodgates we don't expect to open, but selectively. Again, good products, good companies, good management teams. Selectively, the door or the window, depending upon the analogy you want to use, is opening a bit more, and so we'd expect that to continue on a modest increase, but things aren't going to. I don't think it's going to shut down completely unless there's a big war or some other major macro disruption, and we don't expect it to, be the undiscriminating IPO market that maybe we had, 4 or 5 years ago.
And I guess finally, if you're a biotech founder or a biopharma leader, and we know that we have those in our audience, they're navigating funding, they're in this sort of environment where the word they keep telling me is uncertainty. They're still just uncertain about which way the market is going to go. What would you tell them when they're trying to weigh up, should I go a traditional funding route? Should I try and raise some equity capital? Or should I go an alternative route and maybe talk about royalties? What sort of things should they keep in mind making that decision?
Yeah, it's a great question. And my message to those folks, and we interact with them as you do on a daily basis, is look at all your options. There are other options out there. There are other alternatives that maybe 5 years ago you weren't aware of, or didn't exist for you. So look at all the options that are available for the company. I think that's the prudent thing to do. That's the fiduciary responsibility is to make sure your company is funded, right? The CFO's job of a biotech company is not to run out of money. That doesn't mean perfection. The perfection doesn't exist, but a fair deal to finance your company to get to the next stage. That's really what the goal has to be. So there are more options today, and you should look at all of them. And again, at different points in time, these different options may be the best tool. When we talk to the management teams, we tell them every time you go out to do a financing, a royalty financing, alternative financing may not be the right for that particular point in time, but at some point in your corporate financing history, it will be the right time, right? And so our job is to try to find those intersections with the management team where it is the right time. And I think we'll look back 10 years from now and companies will have, we're going to see a significant increase in royalty financing because at the right time, with the right product, right company, it can be a really attractive way to finance the business again to the next event.
Clarke, thanks for joining us today on Beyond Biotech.
Thank you. Happy to.
That's it for this episode. Don't forget to check out all the latest news and analysis at Labiotech.eu. I hope wherever you are in the world, you have a great week ahead. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join us again next time for another Beyond Biotech.